Attorney has been convicted of killing his wife Maggie and son Paul. Now, we brought you all of the team coverage last night and again earlier this morning on Good Morning Charleston. Now we are standing by for the next phases in the process. I am Alyssa Holmes and I want to send things out to Katie Solt. She's live at the Colleton County Courthouse. Katie, what a moment it was last night. And now the question is, what sentence will Murdaugh face?
And you're absolutely right, Alyssa. Truly a historic moment in our South Carolina judicial system. And right now we are waiting to see what sentence Alec Murdaugh will face. As a reminder, he was found guilty of killing his wife of 27 years, Maggie, and his 22-year-old son, Paul, on June 7th, 2021 at the family property Moselle here in Colleton County. Now, there was quite the line of spectators this morning waiting to get into court. This is a theme we've really seen in the weeks leading up to the verdict, and specifically when I walked up this morning, I would say quite the line. There are still some people waiting outside who maybe couldn't get into court that are waiting to hear from the defense team a little bit later. They did not talk last night. We know they will give a full press conference after the sentencing hearing today, about an hour after that hearing wraps up. So we will be expecting to hear from Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin, the two lead defense attorneys in this case. Now, as a reminder, Alec was found guilty on 4 different charges: 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. The murder charges each carry a possible sentence of 30 years to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, Alec Murdaugh did arrive about 9 o'clock this morning in a prison van. He was in a khaki prison jumpsuit, orange slide, socks on his feet, hands shackled. He was looking stoic, kind of the same face that we saw last night as he was escorted out of the courtroom after the guilty verdict, head down, not speaking to anybody. This has really been the theme throughout his arrivals and departures for the past 28 days. He is kept to his head down, not looking at anybody. We did see the defense team actually walk by not too long ago. We did hear them saying that the family of the Murdaughs, John Marvin, Buster, specifically Alec's only surviving son, will likely not talk in court. Now remember, John Marvin, Alec's brother, and Buster both testified for the defense in court, but we are hearing they will likely not address the media or likely not address the court today. We are still waiting to hear if Maggie's family will send a representative or speak themselves during this sentencing hearing. There's a lot of possibilities as to who could speak today. So right now we are still waiting. John Marvin and Buster arriving around 9:15 this morning, and sentencing is supposed to get underway right at 9:30. Judge Newman has been pretty precise about timing everything, and he made it clear he wanted to start at 9:30 sharp this morning, just because court did end up going so late last night. I believe everything wrapped up around 7:30 to 7:45 last night. The jurors got to go home. And another interesting point, Judge Newman said the jurors did not have to return for sentencing, but many choose to come back. They like to see the process through, as Judge Newman phrased it. And specifically in this case, there was one juror, he said, whose job was on the line. He said this juror almost lost their job because of the length of this trial, but he said by a miracle that juror was allowed to stay and finish out the 6 weeks in court. So a very astounding moment. We are not sure how many of those jurors will return, if it'll be all 12 or if it'll be a few, but we do know that there are some jurors who want to come and see this through and who want to come and see through the legal process. And Judge Newman also jokingly mentioned at the end that those jurors don't have to have jury duty for another year after this one, and I think a lot of them probably breathing a sigh of relief when that happened. But I do want to remind everybody, the sentencing in this case, a minimum of 30 years in prison for each murder count, possibility of life in prison without parole. And the weapons charges do carry about a 5-year sentence, but in talking with our exclusive legal analyst, Charlie Condon, he said that's more of a formality at this case when the murder charges and the penalties associated with it are so strict. And we do have to remember, Alec Murdaugh was not walking around a free man before this. He was already being held in custody for the financial allegations. There was several, I think 99 financial charges that he was in prison for. So this was not like Alec was walking around a free man prior to this trial. So he was remanded to the state's custody yesterday evening, and he came back not in a suit and button-up shirt though today. He did come back in that khaki jumpsuit in that prison van after that guilty verdict late last night. So It's a moment that we're waiting for and watching for. It's about 9:34 right now, so we are still waiting for court to get underway. And we don't know how long sentencing is going to take, especially if there's a number of victim impact statements, if there's a large number of people that want to get up and speak. But it is something that we will be waiting and watching for. And you heard me mention that jurors can also come back for this sentencing process. Well, we actually heard from a juror, our ABC affiliate, heard from a juror after the trial last night. Our Eva Pilgrim spoke to one man who says there was one crucial piece of evidence that really brought home the guilty verdict for him.
And the evidence of guilt is overwhelming, and I deny the motion.
The disgraced attorney then taken out of the courtroom. Now, in an ABC News exclusive, juror Craig Moyer breaking his silence, revealing how the jury came to their decision.
When you first got in the room, you took a vote?
It was 2 not guilty, 1 not sure, and 9 guilty.
What was your vote?
Guilty.
From the start?
Yes.
Moyer says it didn't take long to get everyone on the same page.
We started deliberating, going through the evidence. Everybody was pretty much talking, and about 45 minutes later, after all our deliberating, we figured it out.
So it took basically 45 minutes for you guys to come to a decision?
Probably about 45, maybe an hour.
That's really fast.
Yeah, the evidence was clear.
He says it was this piece of video featuring Alec's voice at the crime scene moments before the murders that convinced him.
I hear his voice clearly, and everybody else could too.
Alec finally admitting it was him for the first time a year and a half after the murders.
When he said it was him, were you surprised?
I was very surprised.
Why?
That was his only savior right there.
For some people, it's so hard to understand how a husband, especially a father, would kill their own son. What made you so sure that he had?
His responses, how quick he was with the defense, and his lies, steady lies.
Did you feel like he was a liar?
A good liar, but not good enough.
Moyer also not convinced by moments like this. Alec appearing emotional on the stand.
What did you think when Alec Murdaugh took the stand?
I didn't think much of him.
Really?
Really. I didn't see any true remorse or any compassion or anything.
Even though he cried a lot on the stand.
He never cried.
He never cried. What do you mean by that?
All he did was blow snot.
Did you not see tears?
No tears.
How did you know he wasn't crying?
Because I saw his eyes. I was this close to him.
Moyer says he also didn't buy the defense's argument that Alec didn't have enough time to commit the crime and create an alibi.
The defense said there's no way he could have done all these things, clean everything up, get it all ready, and then go to his mom's and come back in that short amount of time.
I think there's just enough time.
All those factors leading the jury to hand over that guilty verdict.
If you really look at everything, it's all plain and clear.
And the judge delaying sentencing until this morning so that victims could make statements in court. And this morning, we will see Alec Murdaugh arriving to the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit.
So obviously some incredible insight there from that juror, Mr. Moyer. I think first and foremost, the deliberation time began at 4 o'clock, but the verdict was not handed until the clerk of court at 6:40. But you just heard him say it really only took them about 45 minutes to an hour. So actually much less time than what we initially thought. We thought they deliberated for almost 3 hours, but it seems like it was certainly much less than that. When an overwhelming majority already came in with that guilty verdict in their mind, and it was only really 2, possibly 3 people, since one was on the fence to convince, they said they just went through the evidence. And you heard it there, and this is the piece of video that we have seen repeatedly. It was always brought up with almost every single witness who knew the Murdaughs Can you identify those three voices on that dog kennel video taken at 8:44 p.m. on Paul Murdaugh's phone? And every single person conclusively said, I hear Maggie, Paul, and Alec. I think at one point I counted 5 to 7 witnesses. And then, of course, the powerful moment, Alec himself admitting he lied and saying he was in that video. Another key piece and revelation from that juror, many of us seeing Alec get visibly emotional at times, putting his head down and shaking, particularly when those gruesome crime scene and autopsy photos were shown. But as you heard from the juror there, Alec actually didn't shed any tears, which I thought was very interesting. He says he was very close to Alec when Alec was in that witness stand, and Alec wasn't actually crying. It was just more of that emotional aspect. So a very interesting moment there. You would often see him wiping his eyes and looking down. So it wasn't much tears. According to this juror, he appeared stoic during the guilty verdict last night. Alec had this look on his face of stoicism. He was actually looking down at the ground at some points, but then a moment caught by our exclusive legal analyst, former State Attorney General Charlie Condon. He said when Alec turned around after the guilty verdict, Alec looked at his only surviving son, Buster, and mouthed the words, "I'm sorry, I love you." And our Ann Emerson caught that moment as well, but she says that Buster was looking down. He couldn't even make eye contact with his father. So some very powerful moments from the Murdaugh family. Now, I know we did expect court to start about 10 minutes ago. We are still waiting. And we heard from the prosecution team in about a half-hour press conference last night. State Attorney General Alan Wilson and lead prosecutor Creighton Waters speaking extensively, thanking the team, thanking law enforcement investigators. But Creighton Waters did get up early. He gave a fresh interview this morning. Let's listen to just a little bit of that right now as we wait for sentencing to begin.
We're joined now by the lead prosecutor, Creighton Waters. Mr. Waters, thank you for joining us this morning. 28 days in the trial, 70 witnesses, yet only 3 hours to reach a verdict. How do you explain that?
Well, I think I explained it with what you heard the jurors say. We presented a very compelling and strong case, and I think that it didn't take them long to figure this out. They looked him in his eyes.
All right, now we will hear much more from Creighton Waters a little bit later, but right now we want to send you to our live court feed where sentencing is getting underway.
Parties ready to proceed?
State's ready, Your Honor. Bench is ready, Your Honor.
All right, from the state, Mr. Waters.
Thank you, Your Honor. We're obviously here in the sentencing for the state versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh. Your Honor, very quickly, the defendant has no prior record, and the state has no victim impact people who want to speak at this time. But I will address the court briefly. And I don't need, Your Honor, to repeat the evidence that Your Honor just heard for the past 6 weeks, but it is overwhelming, and it shows this man to be a cunning manipulator, a man who placed himself above all others, including his family. A man who violated the trust of so many, including his friends, his family, his partners, his profession, but most of all, Maggie and Paul. This is a very complicated situation, and I want to offer my condolences to the family that has suffered here. We have tried very hard to be respectful and sensitive regardless of what position any person took, because this family has suffered and they've had to suffer in the public eye. And I want to offer my condolences to this family. I want to offer it for Maggie and Paul and Mr. Randolph too, who I had the pleasure of working with on one occasion. But the reality remains is that despite all this attention, this case is about Maggie Murdaugh and Paul Murdaugh, and I'm so thankful that the jurors gave them a voice. You heard about Paul. Obviously, there was the boat case, but you also heard him described as a fun-loving young man, a person who loved life, a person who would do anything for his friends, for anyone. And he's cut down as he was just starting to live his life. You heard about Maggie, You heard how sweet she was. You heard that she was a girl's girl who adapted to the outdoorsman life of her sons, how much she loved her sister and her brother-in-law and their children, and she was cut down in the prime of her life. Both of them, like everyone else, was unaware of who he really was. No one who thought they knew this man, no one who thought they were close to this man knew who he really was. And Your Honor, that's chilling. And I've looked in his eyes, and he liked to stare me down as he would walk by me during this trial. And I could see the real Alex Murdaugh when he looked at me. The depravity, the callousness, the selfishness of these crimes are stunning. The lack of remorse and the effortless way in which he lies, including here sitting right over there in this witness stand. Your Honor, a man like that, a man like this man, should never be allowed to be among free, law-abiding citizens again. And I would submit to you that the only just sentence here to give justice for Maggie and Paul is the maximum, and that would be 2 consecutive life sentences. Thank you, Your Honor.
You indicate that no victim would like to speak at this time. Would any victim like to speak at any time during these proceedings?
Your Honor, one of the things we did, and we did early on, obviously, as I just said, it's a very complicated situation, but we made the decision early on. We've had our victim advocate here who's been doing a wonderful job, regardless of the viewpoints of any individual family member, to provide aid and service to them, and we made that decision. I'm informed by our victim advocate that none of them wish to speak. The defense can certainly address that, but that's what I am informed. But they certainly were offered the opportunity as is required, and I want to commend our victim advocate on the excellent job she did in handling this complex situation that we wanted to be sensitive to, because again, none of us are not mindful of the fact of the suffering of this family.
I know the SLED Chief Mark Keel is here. Would you like to address the court on any matters, Chief?
No, sir. Just to say, again, very proud of our agents' work they've done. I'm proud of the partnership that we've had with the Attorney General's office as we've had for many years. And again, we're here to see that justice is served, and we believe it has been.
Thank you. For the defense.
Your Honor, Mr. Griffin and I would have no comment. The defendant would like to address the court, though.
Mr. Murdaugh.
Good morning, Your Honor. I'm innocent. I would never hurt my wife, Maggie, and I would never hurt my son, Paul.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Anything further?
I don't think further comment is necessary, Your Honor. Thank you.
Mr. Murdaugh, if you'll come before the court for sentencing. This has been perhaps one of the most troubling cases, not just for me as a judge, for the state, for the defense team, but for all of the citizens in this community, all the citizens in this state, and as we have seen based on the media coverage throughout the nation. You have a wife who's been killed, murdered, a son savagely murdered, a lawyer, a person from a respected family who has controlled justice in this community for over a century, a person whose grandfather's portrait hang at the back of the courthouse that I had to have ordered removed in order to ensure that a fair trial was had by both the state and the defense. And I've sat through the trial. Not only have I sat through the trial, but also as the presiding judge of the state grand jury, sat through and participated in the issuance of search warrants of various sorts, bond hearings, and have had to consider many things. And we have this case, and I'm also assigned to preside over 99 others, at least 99 other cases. Though testimony has come up regarding many of those other cases, I will not make any comment with regard to any other pending matter, as I have been assigned those cases as well. It's also particularly troubling, Mr. Murdaugh, because as a member of the legal community and a well-known member of the legal community, you've practiced law before me, and we've seen each other at various occasions throughout the years. And it was especially heartbreaking for me to see you go in the media from being a grieving father who lost a wife and a son to being the person indicted and convicted of killing them. And you've engaged in such duplicitous conduct here in the courtroom, here on the witness stand, and as established by the testimony throughout the time leading from the time of the indictment and prior to the indictment throughout the trial to this moment in time. Certainly, you have no obligation to say anything other than saying not guilty. And obviously, as appeals are probably expected or absolutely expected, I would not expect a confession of any kind. In fact, as I've presided over murder cases over the past 22 years, I have yet to find a defendant who could go there, who could go back to that moment in time when they decided to pull the trigger or to otherwise murder someone. I have not been able to get anyone, any defendant, even those who have confessed to being guilty, to go back and explain to me what happened at that moment in time when they opted to pull the trigger, when they opted to commit the most heinous crimes known to man. In this case, qualifies under our death penalty statute based on the statutory aggravating circumstances of 2 or more people being murdered by the defendant by one act or pursuant to one scheme or course of conduct. I don't question at all the decision of the state not to pursue the death penalty. But as I sit here in this courtroom and look around the many portraits of judges and other court officials and reflect on the fact that over the past century, your family, including you, have been prosecuting people here in this courtroom, and many have received the death penalty, probably for lesser conduct. Remind me of the expression you gave on the witness stand. Was it tangled?
Tangled web, we weave.
Oh, what tangled web we weave. What did you mean by that?
It meant when I lied, I continue to lie.
And the question is, when will it end? When will it end? And it's ended already for the jury because they've concluded that you continued to lie and lied throughout your testimony. And perhaps with all the throng of people here, they, for the most part, all believe, or 80, 90%, 99% believe that you continue to lie now when your statement of denial to the court. Perhaps you believe that it does not matter, that there's nothing that can mitigate a sentence given the crimes that were committed. You know, a notice of alibi was filed in this case by counsel in November, and we conducted a hearing, pretrial hearing, in which you claimed to have been someplace else at the time the crime was committed. Then, after all of the witnesses placed you at the scene of the crime, at the last minute, or last minutes or days, you switch courses and admitted to being there. And then that necessitated more lies and continued to lie. And I say, where will it end? It's already ended for many who have heard you and concluded that it'll never end. But within your own soul, you have to deal with that. And I know you have to see Paul and Maggie during the night times when you're attempting to go to sleep. I'm sure they come and visit you. I'm sure.
All day and every night.
Yeah, I'm sure. And they will continue to do so. And reflect on the last time they looked you in the eyes, as you looked the jury in the eyes. I don't know person who's always been such a gregarious, friendly person can cause their life to be tangled in such a weave web, such a situation that yours have spun into. And it's so unfortunate because you had such a lovely family of such friendly people, including you, and to go from that to this. You know, your license to practice law has been stripped away from you. You turned from lawyer to witness, and now have an opportunity to make your final appeal as an ex-lawyer. And it's almost, it's really surprising that you're waiving this right at this time. And if you opt to do so, it's on you. You're not compelled to say anything. But you have the opportunity to do so.
Judge, I tell you again, I respect this court, but I'm innocent. I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my wife, Maggie, and I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my son, Paw.
Well, and it might not have been you. It might have been the monster you become when you take 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 opioid pills. Maybe you become another person. I've seen that before. The person standing before me was not the person who committed the crime, though it's the same individual. We'll leave that at that. Before announcing sentence on these cases, with regard to all of the other pending cases, are any of them here in Colleton, or I'm sure some of them are?
Yes, sir.
Half of them, or?
I don't have that in front of me, but there are a substantial number of charges here. There's some in Hampton, Orangeburg, Beaufort, Allendale. There may be others that I'm not thinking of right now.
We might have worn out our welcome here in Colleton.
Colleton's been great.
They have been, and I'll take this opportunity to thank Sheriff Hill and all of the court officials and really everyone I've met and dealt with while here in Colleton County. Just been great. But without any delay, we're going to schedule some of the other matters. I know Mr. Harpootlian's scheduling is complicated, and you've sacrificed quite a bit to be able to be here defending Mr. Murdaugh, as well as the Attorney General's office, with all the other many things and obligations you have. And to be able to have the Attorney General here, Alan Wilson, for the period of time that he's devoted to being here along with everyone else, it's been quite a sacrifice. But there are other victims whose cases deserve to be heard. And this case has jumped some of those other cases. Perhaps jumped it because of this case resulting in an assault on the integrity of the judicial system in our state, law enforcement in our state. Even during this trial, the law enforcement have been maligned for the past 5 or 6 weeks by one who had access to the wheels of justice, to be able to deflect the investigation. And as the evidence is pointed out in this case, the looming storm that Mr. Waters talked about, I can just imagine on that day, June 7th, when a lawyer is confronted and confesses to having stolen over $500,000 from a client, and he has a tagger like Mark Tinsley on his tail pursuing discovery in the case involving the death of Mallory Beach, and having a father, for the most part, on his deathbed. I could imagine, or really can't imagine, but I know it had to have been quite a bit going through your mind on that day. But amazingly, to have you come and testify that it was just another ordinary day, that my wife and son and I were out just enjoying life. Not credible, not believable. You can convince yourself about it, but obviously you have the inability to convince anyone else about that. So if you made any such arguments as a lawyer, you would lose every case like that. Cases you will never have an opportunity to argue anymore, except perhaps your own as you sit in the Department of Corrections. Anything further?
No, sir.
All right, Mr. Murdaugh, I sentence you to the State Department of Corrections on each of the murder indictments in the murder of your wife, Maggie Murdaugh. I sentence you for the term of the rest of your natural life for the murder of Paul Murdaugh, whom you probably loved so much. I sentence you to prison for murdering him for the rest of your natural life. Those sentences will run consecutive. Under the statute involving possession of a weapon during a violent crime, there is no sentence where a life sentence is imposed on other indictments. That is the sentence of the court, and you are remanded to the State Department of Corrections. And officers may carry forth on the imposition. Yes, sir.
May we approach?
Yes, sir. Before we adjourn, an order was issued concerning maintaining the juror's identity being anonymous. That order was issued, and for the most part it's been complied with, except for the jury leaving the courtroom yesterday, or not the jury, but the defendant leaving the courtroom while the jury is still seated. Protecting the identity of the jurors is certainly extremely important during the course of a trial to ensure that no one makes contact with the jury or attempts to influence the jury. Jurors have a right to continue that privacy beyond their jury service, but they're not obligated to do so. And it would not surprise me if jurors choose to come forward and to speak, and they're encouraged to do so if that is their desire. I have no problem whatsoever with the jurors unmasking themselves and speaking freely with the media, because they have undergone a life-changing experience as it relates to many of them. And some of them are here now, and I want them to know that should anyone attempt to harass them or annoy them, please let me know and I will address the issue. Secondly, there's a complaint now regarding the posting of autopsy photographs or photos that came from within the courtroom. It's based on the direction of the photographs. It did not come from the audience, came somehow from within the well of the court. The parties have requested an investigation of that. I have my hands full doing my job, and I don't attempt to conduct any investigations beyond the conducting of a trial, but to the extent that law enforcement decides to review that, that will be a responsibility of law enforcement. Yes. And of course, one of the reasons we've sought to seal graphic photos is because the parties have a right to privacy and a right to those matters not being publicly disclosed. If anyone has heard about the recent settlement that Kobe Bryant's, another sports analogy, Kobe Bryant's wife just made with Los Angeles County and others out there over certain disclosures of information involving the death of Kobe Bryant, liability can be substantial, and it's a risk for the most part that's not worth taking. So we'll let everyone judge themselves accordingly with that regard. Aside from all that, our business is done here in Colleton County, and I get to use my gavel one or few times during this trial and order that court be adjourned. Sine die.
All rise.
That no victim family members wanted to speak. Creighton Waters, the lead prosecutor, said due to the complex nature of this case involving the different family members, the victim advocate has been working tirelessly. He did thank her for her work, but Maggie's family did not wish to address the court today. Alec Murdaugh, though, did choose to address the court, saying twice that he is innocent and he would never under any circumstances kill his wife Maggie or his son Paw Paw, as he has referred to him several times throughout his testimony and throughout this trial. And Creighton Waters did mention that he asked for the maximum penalty in this case. Again, I'm pulling up some quotes here from that we just heard moments ago. Creighton Waters said the evidence shows this man to be a cunning manipulator, a man who placed himself above all others, including his family. He went on to apologize to the family members, saying his family has suffered and they've had to do it in the public eye. So he knows that the families have been going through this publicly, not just here within the local media, but on the national and even international stage as well. So Judge Newman sentencing Alec Murdaugh to 2 consecutive life sentences. And Judge Newman, I don't think he really held back in that sentencing. He addressed Alec Murdaugh several times, saying, after Alec Murdaugh said he was innocent, this quote that I think really stands out to me, Judge Newman says, "You were a monster when you took those 30, 40, 50, 60 opioid pills." He said it may have not been you, the person you are now, but it was the monster you became when you took those pills. And he also noted that alibi that Alec Murdaugh filed with his legal team in November. And he says in a pretrial hearing, you said that you were somewhere else when the crime was committed, but that turned out not to be true when you switched course on the stand and admitted to being at the crime scene within minutes of those murders. Another very powerful moment, Judge Newman saying, "I'm sure you see Paul and Maggie when you go to sleep at night." So again, some very powerful moments, even in the moments leading up to the sentencing. And it was a very quick sentencing because there were no victim impact statements to be made by the family members. We do know the defense plans to speak in about an hour to address everything. They did not talk to us last night after the verdict. They only very briefly walked out, looked at our Ann Emerson, and kind of gave her this acknowledgement that they just wanted to go back and regroup. We do expect appeals to come in this case. Judge Newman even addressed that himself and says he expects there to be appeals because of the numerous objections that were made throughout the court by the defense team. So again, likely some appeals in this case, but then Judge Newman also addressing scheduling for even some of the financial crimes charges, and he is slated to preside over 99 of those, as we understand it as well, those 99 financial crimes Alec Murdaugh is charged with. But remember, he did admit to quite a few of those on the stand during his nearly 2-day-long testimony. So how that factors into things we don't quite know yet. But right now, we know that Alec will be remanded to state's custody. He will likely have to go through a couple-month program of being evaluated physically and mentally to see how he's doing. But he walked into court in a khaki jumpsuit, shackled with orange slider flip-flops on his feet. He did address the court only twice, saying again that he was innocent and he would never kill his wife Maggie and son Paul. Now, Judge Newman also making a couple other interesting points that I thought towards the end of sentencing after he had issued the 2 life sentences. He said that jurors are, of course, now allowed to speak freely. They have, as he said, can unmask themselves, because he said this was a life-changing experience. We actually just heard from one before we went into sentencing, and we expect to hear from more now that the case is officially adjourned. But he also mentioned that there has been a release of the autopsy photos from within the court. They were court-issued photos that he said they fought to seal out of respect for all parties involved. We don't know how those autopsy photos got released, and we don't know where they've been released at this point, but we do know that they were released. An investigation is underway. And in case you missed it, here is Alec Murdaugh addressing the court one final time, saying he's innocent.
Good morning, Your Honor. I'm innocent. I would never hurt my wife Maggie, and I would never hurt my son Paw. But I'm innocent. I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my wife Maggie, and I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my son Paw.
Well, and it might not have been you. It might have been the monster you become when you take 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 opioid pills. Maybe you become another person. I've seen that before. The person standing before me was not the person who committed the crime, though it's the same individual. We'll leave that at that.
And with that, I want to bring in our Tara Jabor now. She was inside the courtroom for sentencing. Tara, we talked about a little bit of those key moments. That one we just heard there specifically with Judge Newman calling Alec Murdaugh a monster when he would take those opioid pills. What were some other things that you noticed, specifically with the lack of family members from Maggie's side?
Yeah, so I was sitting about 2 rows behind the Murdaugh family, and, you know, we saw Buster, of course, Brooklyn, his longtime girlfriend, John Marvin Murdaugh, Alec's brother, was sitting right beside Buster, and when the sentencing was announced, he had his arm around Buster, and after Judge Newman said, you know, the life sentence, I saw him pat him twice on the back. And it was really an emotional moment between the family. Alec's sister Lynn was there. She was with one of her daughters and also her husband. They all put their arms around each other. And then when court was just dismissed a few minutes ago, first we saw the whole family go out. They were taken out with security. And then we saw the whole jury come out. Katie, on the opposite side of us, most of the jury were there. They were in a row, and then 2 of them were in another row. Wow. They were all sitting together. So it was a sight to see the family come out and then the whole jury come out right behind them, and then court was dismissed.
Well, we did expect the jurors to come back. We heard Judge Newman mention last night they had the option. Many of them wanted to see the whole process through. I thought that was particularly telling. And we do want to point out John Marvin was not there for the verdict yesterday. Neither was Randy. We don't quite know why yet, and we don't expect them to speak either, do we?
Yeah, we don't know what to expect right now from the family. You know, I just saw them leave. Our investigative reporter, Ann Emerson, she's going around. But we don't know if the family yet will speak today. I mean, you know, as Judge Newman described, this is such a family matter, right? Alec was the wife of Maggie. Paul was his son. You know, Judge Newman even said, I know that you see them when you go to bed at night. I know you hear them. And Alec said, yes, I do.
Really a telling moment, and it's a heartbreaking one in a sense, because you heard Judge Newman even reference it too. He said, we know there's been a lot specifically about Paul in reference to that deadly boat crash in which he was accused of driving the boat when the boat crashed that killed Mallory Beach. But right. Judge Newman went to go on and say Paul was fun-loving and he was in the prime of his life. So even with all the negativity swirling around and with the pending court cases, Judge Newman did want to remind everybody this was a 22-year-old son shot by his father.
Right, yeah, and he I feel like he really drove that point home before his sentencing. I mean, he was looking directly at Alec Murdaugh when he was speaking to him. Alec even got to respond about 3 or 4 times, and it was really an intimate conversation between Judge Newman and Alec Murdaugh. Judge Newman said, you know, I've seen you around, I've seen you at events, you're a lawyer, your family's prominent, your family had a picture in the back of this courtroom, you've prosecuted cases inside of this courtroom. And he was like, and now you're here and you're in this position. And that was, you know, and he told Alec Murdaugh, you know, you'll never be involved in another case unless it's for yourself and for your own charges. I thought that was a very big moment there.
And a very powerful moment. We're going to hear much more from Tara Jabor a little bit later, but we do want to send things over to our Floriana Boardman. She's been speaking with people who came in for the verdict and who are now here for the sentencing. Floriana?
Hi, Katie. So I'm here with Ralph, Debbie, and Delicia. Ralph is actually from Hampton. You've been watching the trial. What is your response to the sentencing today?
Well, I am just glad that I wasn't on the jury. I have to let the Lord sort this out because I feel like only He knows, and of course Alex, you know. But I do feel bad for the family and all He's put them through, and I do think that justice was served today.
Were you watching Judge Newman address Alec today?
I did not see it today. Today's the only episode, I guess you would call it, that I've missed. But I live at Bono Beach now, so we were on our way driving down this way when we stopped by.
Now, what is your response to the 2 consecutive life sentences?
I think it's for the crime. It's fair enough. I mean, you know, personally, I can't imagine any father killing a child and his wife. It's just unimaginable for me.
Debbie, your response?
Justice was served. That's all I can say. I get upset over it.
You're getting emotional. Why does this hit home?
Well, how could you imagine killing your family? And then he showed no emotion in court.
Can you believe that?
Nope. Nope. He'll get his one day. Karma.
And your response, Delicia? You're from Walterboro.
I just think justice was served, and the 2 life sentences, I think that it's not going to bring them back, but I think it's just good. It's good for the family, yes.
All right, so you heard it here from those from this area. I'm going to send it back to you, Katie.
All right, thank you, Floriana. And I'm bringing back in our Tara Jabor right now. Tara, you just mentioned a couple minutes ago, it seemed not like a sentencing, but more of a conversation between Alec and Judge Newman. And he got up to address the court. 2 of the statements were pretty identical in maintaining his innocence in these charges. But one of them, Judge Newman, wanted to address something very specific, in fact, using Alec's own words against him.
Yeah, he did. You know, he said, what was that you said when you were testifying about the tangled web? And Alex said, yes, the tangled web that we leave. And Judge Newman was like, well, Alec, what does that mean? And he said, lies. And Judge Newman said, well, then when do these lies stop? That's my question to you. Obviously, Alec Murdaugh did not respond to that, but, you know, we heard Alec say that. The reason why he lied about not being there at around the time of the murders was because he said he just kept lying and that he couldn't stop. And he didn't admit that, Katie, until last week. Right. And so I feel like that video on Paul Murdaugh's phone, 8:44 p.m., where you hear the voices of Maggie, Alec, and then Paul. And that video is, I think, really what convinced people, because he lied about being there until last week. And the murders were in June of 2021.
And we actually heard a juror address that on the national level this morning or late last night once they were released. And we do want to actually play out that interaction in full for you, for those who missed it this morning.
Was it tangled?
Tangled web, we weave.
Oh, what tangled web we weave. What did you mean by that?
It meant when I lied, I continue to lie.
And the question is, when will it end? When will it end?
I think that moment was so powerful because, again, it was Judge Newman having that conversation with Alec. It isn't anything I've particularly seen in a sentencing before. I've seen judges address defendants before. I have not seen them have a back and forth with a judge. But Tara, another moment that stood out to me was Judge Newman addressing that there was no death penalty on the table in this case. I believe it was because of those 99 financial charges, but right. I don't know if you caught this. Judge Newman even said there are people who have been accused and charged with less that have been sentenced to death. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I think that's when he was talking really about the family legacy and Alec being a prosecutor in this court. And I think he was saying, you know, your family has sent people to the death penalty before, and here you are in this position not being sentenced to the death penalty, but sentenced to life when you have put people to the death penalty inside of this courthouse.
It's kind of that telling moment, and again, we referenced the removal of the portrait probably 6 or 7 weeks ago at this point to ensure that fair trial and to not sway any jurors and to not sway any legal teams to use that in their closing arguments or opening statements or what have you. But there's so much that happened, so much from Judge Newman, who, to quote from Charlie, Judge Newman fan club, he was so poised.
Extremely poised.
And you were in there, and I know you got kind of a read. What were the jurors' faces when they were walking out?
Yeah, well, when they were walking out, they were all just looking straight ahead. You know, everyone was looking at them while Judge Newman was sentencing them. Everyone was looking, of course, at the family to see how they were reacting. And, you know, these 12 jurors, they are the ones who made this decision, right? At the end of the day, Judge Newman sentenced them, but these 12 jurors made the decision that Alec Murdaugh was guilty. So all eyes were definitely on them. You know, they all sat together. It seems like they're a unit now.
They are.
And
they're bonded, as Judge Newman said.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Judge Newman even said, you know, this is a moment that they'll never forget for the rest of their lives, making this decision and bringing justice for Maggie and Paul.
And not only will the jurors never forget this, people that have traveled in from around the country, as far as Kansas and Florida, here for the verdict and sentencing, and some of those people have talked with our Floriana Boardman since yesterday. We want to bring her back in with a person who came in today to see this historic sentencing. Floriana?
Yeah, that's right, Katie. I'm here with Dave Radcliffe, who drove in this morning from North Carolina. Now, Dave, you were telling me you got in this morning at 1 a.m. just so you could get a seat.
Actually, I came last night, and I got a motel room, but then I got up at 12:30 and came over here and was here by 1:30, just so I would be sure to be able to get a seat.
Wow, and what is your response to the sentencing today? Do you think justice was served?
I think so. I don't see how it could have gone any other way and have been fairly disposed of. That's the only, with the preponderance of evidence being what it was, I can't see any other answer. So I think, yes, justice was served.
Now, watching Judge Newman, Alec, today, what was your takeaway?
Well, I think he's a very, very astute judge of the law and character, and from what I've heard about him, he's just an #1 legal scholar. That would be my assessment of him.
Well, now, jury deliberations only took about 3 hours last night. Was that surprising to you at all?
Very much so. I couldn't, well, in a way it was, but then in a way it wasn't. I anticipated it taking at least through the weekend, and I had gone to, a friend of mine and I had gone to dinner about 7 or so, and when the announcement came over the TV in the restaurant, I knew immediately pretty well what the verdict was, simply because history shows that a quick verdict like that usually, people pretty well made up their mind early on.
And a life sentence, do you think that's justice?
Well, yes, I do. The circumstances being what they were and are, yes, very much so. Very much. It's sad for the family. It's sad for everybody involved, especially the remaining son. He's lost all of his immediate family, and it's going to be a tough life for him. This is just the beginning of the rest of his life, and it's going to be a rough one, just because of the circumstances.
Wow, well, you heard it. It's a sad day, but justice was served. Now, I'm going to toss it back to you, Katie, reporting live in Walterboro, Floriana Boardman.
All right, thank you, Floriana. And Tara, we do want to mention, in case people are wondering why we're in a holding pattern here, we are waiting for the defense team to come out and hold a formal press conference. They sent out a memo last night. It'd be about an hour after the sentencing today. But going back to a little bit more of that interaction with Judge Newman and Alec Murdaugh, we've talked about it extensively throughout these past 6 weeks. The family provenance, the family history here in Colleton County. You and I both making very similar notes on this point. Judge Newman saying, it's heartbreaking for me to see you go from being a grieving father who lost his wife and son to being the person indicted and convicted of killing your wife and son. And you also caught a moment there, Judge Newman, actually speaking almost personally about Alec's behavior and his emotions and really just his demeanor from before any of this even began.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was taking notes in court, so I'm going to read this from my notebook. But, he said, literally, I don't know how such a friendly person could weave this web. It's so unfortunate because, he said, you have a lovely family, you're friendly people, including you, to go from that to this, to get your license practice stripped, turn a lawyer into a witness. And, I think that really just speaks to where Alec Murdaugh was on June 7th, 2021, and where he is now. Back then, a prominent lawyer, someone who everyone thought they knew, but now we know that everyone says they didn't really know him. And now he's here, and has a life sentence in jail.
And I think Creighton Waters actually addressed that as well. And again, we're referencing our notes here because there was so much to take in, so bear with me while I find it. But I believe Creighton Waters, and we're hearing some cheering. I don't know if that's the prosecution team possibly walking across the street. But we did hear Creighton Waters say at the beginning when he asked for those double life sentences, he said no one who thought they were close to this man knew who he was, to Tara's point right there. The effortless way in which he lied, including the way he lied on the witness stand, is stunning. Judge Newman, I think, also addressed that facet as well.
Yeah, and you know, at the beginning there, when lead prosecutor Creighton Waters was speaking, you know, he talked about just bringing justice for Maggie and Paul, but he said, you know, this is complicated. He literally looked at John Marvin Murdaugh. He looked at Buster, and he said, my condolences to this family, because, you know, you could really feel that emotion there at that point, because you have the lead state prosecutor looking at the brother of the man who committed this crime.
And Buster, the son, the only living son, who, to my understanding, couldn't even look Alec in the eyes last night. I don't know if you saw a moment there in court. Was he able to look at Alec at all? Were they able to make eye contact at all?
I didn't see Alec make eye contact with him when he was leaving the courtroom. There could have been moments there, but I did not see him look at the family during that point.
It's an interesting dynamic because as we've watched even Buster and John Marvin's testimony, I think at some points, and the pool reporters and pool photographers in court captured these moments extremely well. They caught moments where Alec was smiling at Buster when Buster took the stand. I'm sure there were moments when Alec was possibly smiling at John Marvin as well. So we do have to remember this is a family, and even some of the witnesses you saw it firsthand, the family housekeepers and the caretakers for Alec's parents, they hugged the Murdaugh family after their testimonies sometimes.
Yeah, and you know, we saw Marion. She, of course, was the sister of Maggie. She's Maggie's sister. And when she came in to testify for the state, we saw pictures of her hugging Buster. You know, she talked about how Maggie was a girl's girl. She loved being with the girls. She loved being with Marion's girls. And, you know, they're a family unit. And Buster to Marion, you know, that's still her family, of course. They're a family.
And I think that's why Creighton Waters was very clear in addressing the use of the victim advocate. I think a lot of people were maybe expecting to see Marion return. But to your point, this is such a complicated family dynamic when you have a son of an accused and convicted murderer who also lost his mom, lost his brother, and I think really in effect he lost both of his parents now that his father has been remanded to jail for the rest of his natural life. We will come back to this conversation in a moment, but right now we're going to send things over to Floriana Boardman, who has been talking with people who came into Colleton County to witness this moment. Floriana.
That's right, Katie. There are a ton of people here, friends and family included. I'm here with Shelley, who was actually friends with Maggie. What is your response to this sentencing today?
I am elated that justice has been served. I think Maggie and Paul, and especially Maggie, has not had a voice through a lot of this. And I just feel like things went according to God's plan, and the people here in the county that really saw what actually had happened and did not fall prey to the influence, and I'm just very thankful.
Thankful. I mean, I can imagine this must be very difficult as well.
It is, and you know, Maggie and I were friends in college, and we were roommates after college, and I didn't keep up with her, you know, through the years, but from time to time we would see each other or contact each other. But I saw her the year before, and we talked about getting together and rekindling, and you know, now I'll never have that chance because we never did get together. So I'm just happy that now that she and Paul can rest peacefully, and I think things went the way they should have gone, and just grateful.
So grateful.
And grateful for Creighton Waters and all these folks, the media and the podcast, and the folks that have done a lot of digging have really helped bring Alec Murdaugh to justice, and I'm happy about that.
Do you think justice will ever truly be served for Maggie and Paul?
You know, I don't know. I just feel in my heart that they can rest. And I feel like, you know, once you're judged by your peers, that's what's supposed to happen, and I think that they can rest now. I don't know what else to say about it, but just do feel a little relieved, for sure.
So relief is also a common emotion here in Colleton County. Katie, I'm going to toss it back to you.
Which presser? All right, thank you, Floriana. And I do want to bring in very briefly Ariane Emerson. We heard the press conference could be starting in just a few minutes, but Ann, you were also in sentencing. Any big takeaways from you? It was a soliloquy of sorts from Judge Newman.
I know. So you guys have been talking about that. It really was one of the most incredible really conversations, as you said, between the judge and the defendant. And it was one of those moments where he really wanted to give him that extra moment, that extra time to possibly tell us a little bit more about why or any information. And I really felt like the judge gave him time to speak. And the defendant took, or not the defendant anymore, Alec Murdaugh, the person who's been convicted for these crimes, he had a minute to actually speak about this again and still chose to tell the world that he's an innocent man.
Well, and he used that nickname, not for Maggie this time, which I thought was interesting. He only used the nickname that, on Creighton Waters' point, we only heard for the first time on his testimony of Paw Paw and Maggie. Why do you think the differentiating between not using Mags, as we heard him say extensively, do you think there was a reason, or do you think it was just one final appeal?
Absolutely. We're working towards appeal right now, and even the judge talked about that. This is about what are the next steps for this defense. They are not giving up, and there's a lot of reasons, but there certainly have been setting this up all along in case there's any kind of issues with this trial. That's why Judge Newman has gone the extra step every single time, trying to make sure that there's no doubt that this was a solid verdict. Having said that, that's the way our appeal system works. He's well aware of it, as is everybody else. But, there were just moments like that he had the defendant realize that Maggie and Paul were these victims. He talked about them as if they were almost still in the room, and it really, really spoke back to the times that we would hear sort of how they were talking from the grave is what we heard. And then to hear, well, Maggie and Paul probably visit you every night still. Things like that, those are going to stay with the people that were in that courtroom for the world to hear that.
And another thing that's going to stick with me was Judge Newman saying to Alec Murdaugh, you were a monster when you took those 30, 40, 50, 60 opioid pills. Because Alec, this was right after Alec said he was innocent. I believe it was for the second time when he said,
Everybody give me a thumbs up. My name is Mark Keel, and I'm Chief of the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, otherwise known as SLED. For those of y'all in the local media, you know I don't do very many press conferences. I've been Chief of SLED for 12 years, and I've only done 2. The last one I did was in June of 21 to talk about significant violent crime that's just been unprecedented in our state. But today it's important for me to speak out. It's important because of the victims in this case. It's important because Maggie and Paul cannot. I want to make one thing clear to everybody. There are no winners today. I have a truly humbling responsibility as being Chief of SLED. I lead a dedicated and professional group of investigators, forensic scientists, and support personnel, a staff that worked day in and day out for days just like today to bring justice for victims. And today is not the end. It's the next step in a long road to justice for every person who has been victimized by Alex Murdaugh. Alex Murdaugh has now been rightfully found guilty of murdering his wife Maggie and Paul. He was found guilty because he was guilty. And as one of the witnesses said, Paul was a little detective. This case serves notice to anyone who aided or assisted Alex Murdaugh in committing any crime that justice will be sought. This was an incredible effort by SLED, our local and federal partners, and our partners at the Attorney General's office. And I want to thank Attorney General Wilson and all of his prosecutors, paralegals, and all of his support personnel as well. They did a fantastic job. The agents and prosecutors who worked this case have sacrificed countless moments from their own families to ensure that a person responsible for the murders of Maggie and Paul was fairly tried and brought to justice. The people who work this case do it because they are called to serve. They do it to bring a voice to the voiceless. And they're dedicated public servants. And for that, I'm grateful. SLED agents have worked tirelessly for the past 21 months to ensure justice was served for Maggie and Paul. It is impossible for most people to understand the countless hours of hard work that went into this case. Time away from families, missed birthdays, missed holidays. And it is all done under constant scrutiny, constant pressure. I want these folks standing behind me and around me to know how incredibly proud I am of them as Chief of SLED. I believe firmly in this criminal justice system that we have. And I believe in the rights of an accused to have a fair trial. That is why I have remained silent from beginning to this case until now. Again today, I'm here to provide a voice for Maggie and Paul. I'm here to recognize the heart-wrenching journey that family and friends of Maggie and Paul have endured. And I'm here to support and thank again this incredible team of agents, forensic scientists, support personnel that work at SLED and that worked on this case. Yesterday and today, justice has been served. Thank you.
Not only for Maggie and Paul, and they thanked the team of investigators that worked on this case because And Charlie Condon pointed this out, our exclusive legal analyst, the former South Carolina State Attorney General. There would be no case without the work of SLED, and I think our executive producer, Drew Tripp, also pointed that out on our Unsolved South Carolina podcast as well. There would be no case without the work of SLED and without the work that they did. So that was a very important moment there in this case. And so we're just waiting at this point for the defense to speak. We don't know if it's going to be within the next hour or so. We did hear that there would be about an hour gap in between sentencing and a formal press conference from the defense. They very briefly and exclusively spoke to Ariane Emerson as they were leaving court right around 7:45 last night. It was just a very brief moment after the verdict, and Anne asked them for a statement, and they just kind of looked at her and said, "We need to regroup." And they will address everyone tomorrow morning. You just heard Anne mention she's working to get some other people involved in the financial crime side, but you may have heard her mention appeals are coming. That is part of the judicial process. Alec Murdaugh has the right to appeal in this case, so we are expected to have them coming. And we do want to just kind of refresh everybody because sentencing was fairly quick because there were no victim impact statements. The state saying family members, because of the complex nature of this case and who was involved, you know, loved ones, sisters, sister-in-laws, mothers were murdered, and nephews in some cases for some of these family members, and brothers murdered. So really no family members chose to speak out in court. It was more of a soliloquy from Judge Newman speaking to Alec Murdaugh directly. And we want to just play you back the moment that he sentenced Alec Murdaugh to 2 consecutive life sentences for the murders of his wife Maggie and son Paul. Let's take a listen.
Mr. Murdaugh, I sentence you to the State Department of Corrections on each of the murder indictments in the murder of your wife, Maggie Murdaugh. I sentence you for a term of the rest of your natural life for the murder of Paul Murdaugh, whom you probably loved so much. I sentence you to prison for murdering him for the rest of your natural life.
Get it figured out. All right. And I don't know if you'll be able to hear Mr. Mark Tinsley here, so bear with me while we try to get him mic'd up just very briefly. He testified in this case, I think multiple times without the jury and then with the jury. Thank you so much. And live TV, folks, we're doing this on the fly because Mr. Tinsley's time is valuable. So thank you so much, sir, for joining us. You have become synonymous with this case specifically because of the involvement with the deadly boat crash involving Mallory Beach, a case that was almost 4 years ago at this point. Sir, thank you for joining us today. You've been here pretty much throughout the trial. You've testified. Walk us through just yesterday and today. What was it like for you being in that courtroom?
You know, so today is the 4-year anniversary of when they found Mallory's body. The testimony ended on the 4-year anniversary of the boat crash. It's not logical to think that the things that I did pushed someone like Alec to think that this was the only thing. But oftentimes, because we're people, you don't think logically, you think with emotion. So it's been emotional. I knew Paul and Maggie, and he had lots of options other than this. So there's always doubt what a jury's going to do. There's always questions. I knew that when I spoke to the jury and looked in their eyes that I felt like there was a connection, that there was a recognition. Sometimes that's real, sometimes it's not. And I'm just glad they saw through all of his lies and they reached a just verdict.
And it was a quick verdict, less than 3 hours, but a juror spoke out and said it was actually more like 45 minutes to an hour. What does that say to you in a case like this?
Well, you know, these people live with this case, and even though they're not deliberating, I'm sure they're considering everything. But I think, and I know more than most people
Live
do.
TV. We're switching mics here, folks. We can hear Mr. Tinsley a little bit better.
You know, I know more than most people do in terms of evidence, and I know things that didn't come into evidence. And so I think the evidence is overwhelming. You know, when he put himself at the scene as close to the murders, there's just really no way to get out of that. It was just so close. The timeline was so compressed. And so, I think the evidence was clear. I think and they saw it, and they saw through him, and they saw him for what he is.
And we don't want to forget Mallory and her family. That's the reason, as you said, that this kind of all started, we think, back in 2019. Has the family, do they wish to release a statement? Do they have any words for people that might be watching at this point?
You know, they were here this morning. They take a lot of comfort in the fact that there's good coming out of her death. They're still looking forward to accountability for her death. We've got a ways to go, but no, I mean, there's some peace and comfort in this verdict.
And one quick final question for you, Mr. Tinsley, just the consecutive double life sentences, was that pretty much what you were expecting to come out of today?
Yeah, I expected it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mark Tinsley, for joining us this morning. We'll let you get back to the Beach family. And right now we're going to send things over to our Floriana Boardman, who is standing live now with some more people who came in to watch this historic sentencing. Floriana.
Cute. Go.
That's right, Katie. People have been invested in this case. I'm here with Marcy, who has now been here for, is it 16 days? What is your response to this sentencing today?
So I'm glad that I got to see the trial through its culmination. I was really happy yesterday. I am one of the very, very few that felt like at the beginning that the jury was going to convict him. I think that they were really paying attention. I think that they were invested in some of the witnesses who proved that that they were being intimidated. I think they felt that. I think that that the prosecution did a great job of showing people how he had manipulated people all his life, and he was still trying to manipulate people. And as Judge Newman said this morning, he wasn't going to stop. I mean, he's gambling for beef sticks in prison, and he's in the hospital room trying to buy drugs. So you know that the behavior is never going to change. So what I am particularly happy about is that he is going to pay for these crimes. And the financial crimes, I'm sure he'll pay for some of that, but these crimes were important because he needs to go to state prison with all of the people that he has sent there and that his father has sent there, and let him be with people who aren't at Club Fed. So I am just really delighted. I'm so proud of the jury, and the prosecution, and Judge Newman was absolutely excellent. Everybody here, because this was a big thing to be here all day, and everybody was just so nice. I met a lot of people who were just as invested in the trial as I am, so it's been a really interesting occasion, and we got justice, so I'm really excited about it.
So you do believe justice was served today?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I was one who thought that the verdict was going to come back very quickly. I was surprised it was last night. I expected it to be today, but I knew that they weren't going to have to take a long time, because I could look at them and see they were done. You know, they were done. You could see that they had heard enough and that they were convinced he was guilty. So.
And I assume you're relieved to be able to go back home.
Yes, I'm going home this afternoon. I'm so relieved and happy to get back to a different life. So.
Awesome. So like you heard, Katie, there are several people here, several people who have been invested for days on end, not just coming here just to hear the verdict or the sentencing. I'm going to toss it back to you.
All right, thank you, Floriana. And we do want to remind everybody we are standing by, awaiting for Alec Murdaugh's defense team to hold a press conference. We are hearing that could be at 11:45, so a little bit later than we were anticipating. We were expecting maybe closer to 11:15, 11:30, but now we're hearing that it's been pushed back. No idea as to why right now. We know the Murdaugh family has already left. Buster, John, Marvin, and Lynn have already left. They left actually pretty promptly after sentencing was over. So again, we are waiting for the defense team to hold a press conference expected at around 11:45 this morning. So for those of you just joining us here on ABC News 4, this is our continuing special coverage of the sentencing of convicted double murderer Alec Murdaugh, a once prominent Low-Country attorney, now charged with the murders of his wife Maggie and son Paul. That happened on June 7th, 2021 at the family's property here in Colleton County. It's been 6 weeks, 28 days close to 100 witnesses in this historic trial. According to our exclusive legal analyst, Charlie Condon, this is actually now the longest trial in state court history here in South Carolina, so really a historic moment. Media have come from across the country. This has garnered international attention, and today Alec Murdaugh learned his fate. He will be sentenced to 2 life sentences that will run concurrently, and in the sentencing moment, I don't know if we have it pulled up and we can play it out, but Judge Newman said to Alec, "For the murder of your son, Paul, who I'm sure you loved very much, you will be sentenced to prison for the rest of your natural life." And I think that was quite a moment. We've heard Alec refer to Paul with several nicknames. He still maintained his innocence twice in court. But we do want to play part of Judge Newman's sentencing for you now when he sentenced Alec Murdaugh to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Mr. Murdaugh, I sentence you to the State Department of Corrections on each of the murder indictments in the murder of your wife, Maggie Murdaugh. I sentence you for a term of the rest of your natural life for the murder of Paul Murdaugh, whom you probably loved so much. I sentence you to prison for murdering him for the rest of your natural life.
That was Judge Newman sentencing Alec Murdaugh to life in prison without the possibility of parole for each count of murders, one for his wife of 27 years, Maggie, and one for his son, Paul. Thank you so much for staying with us here on ABC News 4 and our special continuing coverage. We are going to take a quick break, and we'll be back after this.
This case together and lived it for 2 years. You know, they've made sacrifices. Mine was the easy part. A little spoke on a big wheel. And I'm just really, really appreciative and fortunate to have been given the opportunity to help.
Well, and talk to me a little bit about what you think as far as when you were investigating this and working on this. What was it that brought it home to you that you were tying up loose threads here, connecting dots?
Well, the availability of weapons and just the as secluded as that piece of property is, and I've worked a lot of death scenes, and I've worked some contract death scenes and that kind of thing, and I've never known it to happen like this and not be somebody really, really close. And then you put it all together with the weapons and the location, and then some of the other evidence that the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division and the AG's office worked on that sets the timeline, and the mere fact that as a parent, if I found two of my loved ones in that condition, I'm going to reach out to my other children immediately and say, go to the nearest police department. We're not talking about it now. Don't pack clothing. Get there now. That would be enough for me.
And to bring it around too, I mean, and I know Drew's probably got a couple of questions for you as well. Drew, do you want to pop in? Drew is our executive producer. We've been working on this podcast for 2 years. We've been following this case, Unsolved South Carolina, for 2 years. And Charlie's been our exclusive legal analyst on this case.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
So we have been following your work for a while.
Wow. For me, I'm not an expert. I can't say what is absurd and what is not absurd. But some of the theories we heard from the defense's expert witnesses and the almost want to say mental leaps that had to occur for those theories to come together. Explain how you deconstructed those a little bit, and what came to you immediately in taking them apart.
Well, a lot of people, and this is a general statement, a lot of people don't want to pay attention to those variables, and then when they don't have an answer, they say the totality of the circumstances. I pay attention to the variables, and I looked at height, I looked at blood patterns, I looked at that kind of thing, and I looked at the way some evidence was documented, and I just thought back, what if I was the first examiner on the scene? What would I really think about this? And you pick some evidence that you've got a high degree of confidence in, and some that not so much. And you base that, but you got to do it yourself. It's hard to do it from a photograph or, a video. If I'm looking at a crime scene or a piece of evidence, I want to put my eyes on it because I just feel that lends to your credibility, and that's how I live.
Certainly, they weren't. Those experts weren't necessarily given the benefit of the full picture, were they?
Well, I'm probably not the one to ask that, but they, and like I said, their intentions were well. I just don't agree with their opinions.
And as you heard, defendant Murdaugh now convicted of these heinous crimes, what ran through your mind when he was still saying, look, I didn't do it, this wasn't me, and I love them? What did you think when you heard that?
I tell you, I also gained mad respect for Judge Newman. And I think he said it. I believe you. This wasn't you. This wasn't you. It was the individual I'm looking at, but it wasn't you. And we don't know motivators. We don't know motivators that make men do this to their families, but we just clean up the mess or try to.
Anything else?
Ken, you're from here. You can appreciate what Alec Murdaugh was and what he represents to a lot of people, maybe who don't have his means and lifestyle, aren't accustomed to that. But what from a 1,000-mile away view or 1,000-yard view, he's got money, he's got land, he's got guns, he's got boats, he's got tractors, he's got a nice family. Rationalizing that part, how could someone do this and throw all that away? Well, you're from here. You can speak to that. You know that mindset of growing up.
Well, I am from here, but you didn't just describe me, and I don't know where you're at when you're, with all that kind of stuff. I'm just a old country boy, and like I said,
think that's what he's speaking to.
Yeah, you don't know what motivates an individual, and I think the AG or Mr. Waters, one of them said, it's never enough, and different motivations for different people. But when they put me in the ground, the only, you can't take that money with you, and the only thing I'm going to ever have is my word. So I guess it just means a little bit more to me than some other people.
I gotta speculate for just a second. Where did the smoking gun go? Where are the weapons?
Well, I don't know. I believe there were some missed opportunities, but I also believe at that point in time, I don't think the state could have taken it any further. Being all those characteristics that we've talked about, I don't know that it could have went any further at that time. And they were awful critical of some of the things that the investigators for SLED did, but there's never a perfect investigation, never a perfect crime scene, and my hats are off to them. I think they did one heck of a job, and if it was me there as the victim, I want them coming, and I want them doing it the same way.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you,
Kinsey.
ma'am.
It's so nice to meet you.
I'm so unworthy. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
So nice to
Thank
meet
you.
Thank you.
You got time for you are a popular man. Are you tired yet?
Look at the hounds. Thanks, Charlie.
Yeah,
you're the mayor.
You know where the guns are? Yeah, I did ask. That was my final question. He said, I think.
Took me back. I was disappointed.
Now that this trial has closed out, and I know you represent a lot of financial victims, what is next in your steps?
Everything is the pursuit of complete justice. Alec is going to die in prison. He doesn't deserve to see the light of day and be out here with everybody else. But every single financial charge needs to continue to be prosecuted. We know it's not going to make a difference in terms of the length of time he spends in jail, but those victims deserve that closure as well. And what will Alec do? I don't know. I'm pretty sure his money will run out. He's got 2 consecutive life sentences. I'm sure he might look forward to the opportunity to get out and interact with people on each of the 90 cases. So we don't know what the future holds, but we know that we're not stopping.
All right. Anything else you'd like to add?
The one thing I would say is the irony of this entire situation. And Judge Newman brought it up. In the back of the courtroom, there was a picture of a Murdaugh. And back when that Murdaugh was in power, Judge Newman would never even be able to be on the bench. And to be here today, and everything be flipped on its head, and I think the true end of the Murdaugh legacy died with Maggie and Paul.
I have a quick question. How do you feel, or what do you think about how Judge Newman was throughout this whole process? I've been seeing on Twitter, he's got quite a fan club, and he didn't make it about him.
Yeah. Judge Newman is by far one of the most amazing judges that our state has ever seen. He is extremely intellectual. He's quick on his feet. His demeanor is that which lawyers like myself and others aspire to be like one day in the future whenever we get to that point. He represented the bench in our state very well, and I think it was very admirable the way that he handled it. He was firm, but he wasn't a pushover. He, gave people the chance to be heard, And when the time came, he did what needed to be done. You can't ask for anything more in a judge.
Is it also kind of ironic that here you had the Murdaugh, you had the good old boy system, like white undertones, and you have an African-American judge presiding over and giving him this sentence?
Yeah, I think from the historical dynamics in the area in which we live, there is a lot of irony to the racial dynamics that we saw. But Judge Newman is an amazing judge, period. You know, and Alec Murdaugh is a horrible person, period. And, you know, I just look at it, again, I grew up here. You know, I tell everybody when Alec's ancestors were running the solicitor's office and in power and making a bunch of money, mine was sharecropping. And to look at a man in shackles who had everything and all the opportunities he had, not through his own work, but through the work of the opportunities people before him had. And there I'm sitting in the courtroom, first generation college grad, first generation lawyer. Man, it's why? The only thing running through my head, looking at how hard I've worked to get to where I'm at, and to look at him who had everything, is why? And I don't think I'll ever understand it, ever.
I don't know if any of us ever will.
No, I mean, whatever. I'm just glad that Alex is being held accountable. All the people that he hurt, all the people that he lied to, you know, his son Buster. Alec was a different kind of monster, you know, and I don't know. Sometimes I just have to catch myself from getting too country. But I was like, that sentence fried him up like a catfish. And he earned it. He wasn't given a sentence, he earned one.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Oh, that last line, that was perfect.
I know.
Yep.
The catfish one.
He wasn't given that sentence, he earned it.
Oh, I like that.
My shoulders are killing me doing this.
I know. I'm going to tweet that.
Mic test. This is your microphone test. 1, 2.
Press corps. So I ran over there and started filming them with my phone.
I'm here at the mic. Are you still hearing the hum? Alrighty, mic check. Mic check. 1, 2, 3. 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3. 3, 2, 1. Hopefully it's no hum. Looks like it's gonna rain. Knock on wood. Knock on wood. It's really low now. Alright. Alright. Turn your mic up, audio up, please, a little bit, not too much. Alright, check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Colton County Courthouse. Me and Josh. Mic check.
Yeah, point. Yeah, 1 second.
Push it up.
Not on camera.
I don't know where it's coming from, bro, because we hardlined this. Hey, Jess, hold on for a second. Hold on. Try channel 2. Put your audio channel 2. Hold on. Don't go anywhere yet. Wait, I'll try one more thing. Put it on channel 2. Turn your audio up on channel 2. All right. Try this. I got into use channel 2. Let me see if there's something wrong with this. Let me see if there's something wrong with his channel. Yeah, so something's wrong with his channel 1 audio. Something's wrong with his channel 1 audio port then. So that sounds good? This sounds good? All right. Just use your channel 2. All right. Thank you much. All right, y'all. I ain't forget about y'all, you know. Mic checks. Everybody good? Everybody good? I see a thumbs up. All right. And I'm out. Peace.
Testing one. Do you hear that? Got it? It's right there. Do you have it?
There is a fuel crews already there.
Everyone good? We're like 5 minutes out, but I just want to make sure everyone's set up. Okay. I'm great. Huh? Well, you're going to have the whole team will be up here. So we'll go down the line, we'll introduce everybody. And then hand raise and Dick and Jim will call on you. Cool? Okay. Cool.
to introduce everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So y'all spread out behind me. Where is everybody? Good afternoon, or afternoon. I'm Dick Harpootlian. This is Jim Griffin. That's Emily Dale. That's Maggie Fox. That's Holly Miller. And this is Phil Barber. We are Alec Murdaugh's defense team. We're able to answer your questions. We're not going to make a statement. I know y'all don't want one. So, anybody got a question?
Do you think it was a mistake to put Alex Murdaugh on the stand?
No. Next.
Mr. Harpootlian, why did you object to that juror being dismissed yesterday?
Why didn't I?
Why didn't you?
Well, for two reasons. One, she admitted she talked to other people about the case, but not specifically. But technically, I think the judge had leeway to excuse her, but she clearly, and after we interviewed her back in chambers, in my mind, had not made up her mind. And I thought that was important.
Do you think she would have held your case?
I don't know. She didn't express an opinion to us. She said she was open. She had made up her mind.
Mr. Harpootlian, the defense has made a great deal of points about SLED and their handling of the investigation. Through your position in the Senate, do you feel there's an opportunity to address that from a legislative standpoint?
I think there were significant issues, but I won't be addressing that in the Senate unless it comes up in a bill. I'm not going to mix this role with my role as a senator. I would not do that.
Why do you think that the prosecutors didn't seek the death penalty in this case? And what do you make about the judge's comments after the verdict that he agreed with the jurors?
Go ahead.
Death penalty.
What now?
Death penalty question.
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
Why didn't they seek the death penalty?
Well, I'm somebody that's prosecuted and defended a bunch of death penalty cases, and clearly, you never do it in a circumstantial case. Because you're not 99 times out of 100, a jury's not going to sentence somebody to death without I saw him do it, he confessed, or great forensic evidence at the minimum. They had none of that here. Secondly, in a death penalty case, it gives us the ability to individually voir dire jurors, which would have been very helpful here. And the prosecution obviously didn't want that. So I don't disagree with, if I'd been prosecuting this case, I probably wouldn't have brought it, but based on, what we heard was presented to the Colleton County Grand Jury by Detective Owen that Jim crossed, blood spatter that didn't exist, testimony about guns that was wrong. I can go through the litany with you. Going back to his question, I think SLED needs to do some self-examination on the forensic processing. They did not. One of the things we complained about was that Maggie's phone would have had all her GPS data on it if they processed it within 5 days. And they because they didn't, the GPS data got overridden. It was just one, which would have been helpful to Alec. It's fingerprints, footprints, and all kinds of forensic things that weren't done. So what was the question about the judges?
What do you think about the judge's comments after the verdict? Did he agree with it and thought it was the right conclusion?
He's entitled to his opinion.
Mr. Harpootlian, can you expect an appeal anytime soon?
10 days we'll be filing an appeal.
What do you believe the strongest grounds for an appeal are?
What'd you say?
What do you believe the strongest grounds for an appeal are?
It was the admission of all the financial crime evidence, and that was offered up, as evidence of motive, that because he was confronted about one financial transaction involving attorney's fees by the chief accountant of the law firm, that was being offered as motive for why he would go home and kill his wife and son, which we thought was illogical and ludicrous. And there really was no evidence linking one to the other, and we did not think it should come in. Not only did that come in, but every other financial misdeed that they could bring in over the last 10 or 15 years was allowed in, and we think that we strongly objected. We respect the judge's decision, but we believe that was erroneous decision, and we believe that the judge was somewhat misled, because at the conclusion of the case, when Mr. Metters is up on his rebuttal argument in front of the jury, he says to the jury, oh, forget about all that motive evidence. We don't have to prove motive. We just have to prove malice, which is right. But why did they go to all the effort to prove motive when at the end they say, you don't have to believe us on our motive theory, but by then they had cast Alec as a despicable human being, and that was the reason they offered it in the first place. And we think the appellate courts will take a strong look at that. We feel like that is a very solid ground for an appeal, and we're going to pursue that.
Looking back at the last 6 weeks, long trial, would you guys do anything different in the last 6 weeks?
No.
Anything in this trial?
No. I mean, look, once the judge, first of all, we believe if the judge was going to let that stuff in, it should have been limited to the Ferris case, which is what they were asking him about on Monday on the fee. Number two, Tinsley, the person that made the motion to compel to be heard on Thursday, Dawes Cook, Alex's lawyer, both agreed there wasn't going to be any storm or Armageddon or anything that was going to happen that Thursday. The judge might have issued an order, which months down the line might have posed a problem. So once they got that character in it, character information is he's a thief, he's a liar, then it dictated this jury had to think he was a despicable human being and not to be believed. So it was about character, it wasn't about motive. So as a result, our options were limited. Should he take the stand? Well, you know, we debated that. He always wanted to take the stand, but once that information was in, I mean, if he had to take the stand to explain the kennel video, the lie, if you will. He had to, but he had no credibility. His credibility had been stripped away by the financial misdeeds. Yes.
How is Buster doing, and why did he choose not to speak?
We could have had Mother Teresa up there speaking on behalf of Alec at sentencing. I mean, he was getting a double life sentence. That was expected. I mean, this is Judge Newman. He's a very stringent punisher when it comes to crimes and sentences. I mean, that was never in dispute. And so for Buster to get up and speak on his dad's behalf would not have made a difference. And why do you want to put that kid through more trauma than anybody that we can imagine has ever been through?
Have his feelings about his dad changed at all in the trial?
What's that?
Have his feelings about his dad changed at all?
You know, I can't speak to Buster's feelings. I can tell you this. There was a lot of effort by the state to convince the family that Alec is the murderer. The family came to trial every day for 6 weeks expecting to hear proof positive that he killed Maggie and Paul, something that they had not heard before. After 6 weeks of trial, they came away more convinced that he did not do this, and they steadfastly in his camp and support him, and that's where they stand.
What's next for Alex?
Well, Alex will be leaving shortly to go to Columbia to R&E, it's called, where he'll be at the South Carolina Department of Corrections. He'll be evaluated. That's about a 30-day process, and then he'll be sent to wherever the correctional facility that they assign him to.
Will they ask for any special security measures for him?
No, I don't think. Alec was not optimistic that with all of the scrutiny and press and all of his bad acts being out in the public, in the world, media domain, that he could get, a jury to put out all the noise and just focus on the murder. And so coming in, he was somewhat pessimistic. He became optimistic as we got through the process. But I got to tell you, and all you reporters, you know the whole story, I'm sure. And if you're sitting on that jury, they heard everything that would be in an HBO documentary, a Netflix documentary about the Murdaugh family dynasty downfall, except the Stephen Smith matter. I mean, so we were hoping to get a jury to put all, that could ignore the noise, focus on the murder, and we ended up trying a case that they could have watched on Netflix.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, not outmatched. I mean, look, they won this case the day the judge bought into letting them put every piece of, stealing from kids who lost their mother, from somebody with pancreatic cancer, somebody that's a paraplegic. I mean, all of that 2.5 weeks, by the time they got done with it, it didn't matter about final argument. It didn't matter about what we put up. They would never, ever, ever acquit him after that. Last question. We'll file something, not in 10 days, but we'll file a notice of intention to appeal. Then we've got 30 days, I think, to file a brief.
Yeah, so you file the notice within 10 days. You got to get a transcript.
Oh, that'll take a while. I forgot.
That'll take months before they type up everything, and then we start briefing.
Are you all going to handle the appeal?
Yes.
And are you at the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court?
And the U.S. Supreme Court.
And the U.S. Supreme Court, if necessary. That's correct.
What's the federal issue?
Doyle.
Oh, there's a huge federal issue. That's why I got so animated that the judge told me to sit down. And part of the trial is the state eliciting or asking questions of Alec about why he did not come forward and tell law enforcement where he was at the time of the kennel video. And that was after he was arrested. And there's U.S. Supreme Court cases are clear that post-arrest silence cannot be used against you. And that is a classic violation of the Fifth Amendment. And we feel strongly that if we lose at the state courts, we'll have success at the federal courts.
Can you tell us about the plea negotiations before trial?
No.
There were no plea negotiations.
Because there weren't any.
They never offered him anything.
Not our job to find the real killer. If they had taken fingerprints, if they'd gotten footprints, if they hadn't destroyed, if they'd preserved Maggie's phone with her GPS, if they had not, they misrepresented to the grand jury that they had a shirt with his blood on it. If Owen had opened his email, he says he didn't get, would have told him a year before there was no human blood on that T-shirt. It was a comedy of errors in terms of the forensics on this. So, do I have faith that they would find the real killer? No. What? We don't know. What? Last question. Say that one more time.
Putting Alec Murdaugh on the stand.
There was no choice.
Why?
Because he had been made out to be a monster who stole from children and crippled people, and is crippled that's not a politically correct word. I'm sorry, I'm an old guy. Crippled people who had just done horrible, despicable things, and he had to try to push back on that. And if he'd let that lay without taking the stand, he was toast. Taking the stand, could he pull it off? Apparently didn't.
In hindsight, do you regret not asking for a change of opinion in this case?
Not really, because we checked. We did focus groups in this case in a county way far away from here. 8 of the 10 people on the 2 focus groups knew all about this case. There was nowhere you could go that you could find. We believe you could find a jury that didn't know, hadn't watched TV, hadn't read the stuff you write or the stuff the Twitter stuff. And by the way, one of the good pieces of information now that this trial is over, Griffin can start tweeting again.
That's right.